Hey, welcome back to another edition of Ask Pastor Matt. Hey, anything, right? Anything you want, ask me a question. If you haven't seen your question come up yet, maybe resubmit it, send it again. If you haven't asked a question yet, hey, ask it. Would love to answer your questions. We're going to do some kind of rapid fire things and a few topics that were brought up. So we're just going to work our way through some things real quick. Maybe you'll learn something, right? Maybe you can respond and teach me something, who knows. But let's go through a couple quick things here on Ask Pastor Matt. So I'm going to give you kind of a topic, and then I'm going to give you what I think Scripture is saying about that topic. Some of these things maybe you've heard of, maybe some of them not, right? But let's look at some things that may or may not be in the Bible. You ready? First one, how about aliens, right? Aliens, okay? You guys ever think about this? Are aliens in the Bible? Maybe you've heard people say, yeah, aliens are in the Bible, right? And usually this is a scripture they reference. You see it there on the screen from Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4. It says, "And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself, and the brightness was all around it, and radiating out of its midst like the color of amber out of the midst of the fire." And so there's a group of people out there, right, who would say that what Ezekiel saw in chapter 1 was a spaceship, right? It was this, ring of fire engulfing itself in the amber color and all this stuff. It was a UFO, right? So he's looking at the sky, and aliens are coming to visit Ezekiel. Do I believe these are aliens coming to abduct Ezekiel or cows or make weird designs in cornfields? No, I don't, right? So if you look at Ezekiel, you look at kind of his role as a prophet and what God told him, some of the things that were revealed to him. A lot of that's revealed to him is about kind of the glory of God and then the workings of heaven and things like that. I think what he's seeing is he's seeing a glimpse of kind of the workings of heaven, the glory of God, and really kind of the splendor and awe, majesty, and power that's associated with it. I don't think these are aliens. Sorry. All right. I do believe that what Ezekiel saw was not natural, not of this world, but of a heavenly and supernatural world. So, are aliens among us? I don't think so. Could be some deeper questions, right? Is there life out there for us to find? Are we the only ones on an inhabited planet? Well, maybe you'll have to ask that question, and we'll venture down that road later. How about this one? This is especially for Kalea. Kalea wanted to know, are unicorns in the Bible? Now, why do we ask that question, unicorns? Why unicorns? Well, King James, good old King James, Isaiah 34:7 says, "And the unicorn shall come down with them. Their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust saturated with fatness." Now, first of all, those unicorns do not sound very nice. Okay, land shall be soaked with blood. Okay, I don't know what's going on there, but we look back at the first part of that. Okay, does this mean that there are unicorns in the Bible? That there's horses with a horn on their head, maybe wings flying around and being all lovely and shooting out rainbows and that kind of stuff? Sadly, there's not unicorns, at least unicorns as we know them in Scripture. If you go back and look at other translations, even the New King James, this would be translated things like oxen, and other large beasts. Some people would say this could even be a reference to something like a unicorn, a rhinoceros, something like that, but not the unicorns as we know them. Right? So are unicorns in the Bible, like you see there, all fluffy and wonderful? No, they're not. And probably a good thing, because they sound like they'd be kind of mean anyways, right? So no unicorns in the Bible. Sorry. How about this one? How about giants, right? Mythological creatures, right? Maybe fables, tales, relics from the past. Are giants real? And the answer to this one is yes, right? There really are things such as giants, and there's all kinds of scripture references for this. I picked out Amos 2:9. I like to find maybe some of the more obscure prophetic references, right? It says, "Yet it was I," this is God talking, "who destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of cedars, and he was strong as the oaks." And God says, "Yet I destroyed his fruit above and his roots beneath." So God's saying, listen, there really are kind of these big, giant, scary dudes, but I'm bigger. I'm bigger than the boogeyman, right? And so are giants real? Yes, they're real. They're all throughout Scripture, and even today we see, some of the ancestor, or we see some of the people who are the lineage of that, I guess you could say, right? You see people who still carry some of that stuff, and you can really trace giants all the way back to the book of Genesis, right? And you get groups of people who were kind of labeled, and they were described as people who were quite large, big, scary people. And you get some names like the Nephilim, right? And of course, there's a whole other question about, were they, from celestial beings or angels or things like that. What we do know about them is that they were mighty men. They were big people, right? Labeled really as giants. You get the Emim, the Anakim, the Amorites, all these different groups of people who are tied together with this idea of being giants. And of course, probably the most famous giant in Scripture is Goliath, right? So David fights Goliath. He's the giant from Gath. Gath is a region where the Amorites would have been, so they believe that he could have been a descendant of the Amorites. And we look at some of what it talks about with Goliath. We don't get a good measurement for how tall he really is. There's kind of some discrepancies there. But if you look at Scripture, it's anywhere really from probably about 7 feet up to maybe 9.5 feet. But even if you look at the measurements for his armor and things like that, he had to be a pretty big guy, right? To carry all that armor and carry the spearhead that weighed 15 pounds and things like that. So are giants real? Yes, they are. And even we still see that kind of evidence and proof today. There's still some of that in our genetic code, right? Still floating around. So giants absolutely are real. And how about this one? Dragons, right? Are dragons in the Bible? And I'm going to say, yeah, they kind of are, right? And so here's what we're going to talk about with dragons from Job 41. You got to go read the whole chapter because the whole chapter gives a description of what Job references as Leviathan, right? We've kind of mentioned that already with dinosaurs, Leviathan, and Behemoth. But specifically with Leviathan, it's going to describe a creature that sounds a lot like what we would say is a dragon. It talks about like the scales on the back of its neck are like shields that interlock, and its skin folds together and is like impenetrable. It talks about its teeth and its claws. And there's even a couple of verses there. It says, out of his mouth go burning lights, sparks of fire shoot out, smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. So you're talking about something with scales and claws and teeth, and it's big and it's scary and it shoots fire. Kind of sounds like the dragon, right? So people say, well, there's a lot of things in Job that are metaphorical or allegory, possibly, right? But Job's one of the oldest stories that we have. So thousands of years ago, they had stories about dragons, right? That sound a lot like, again, the stories that we have today. And those stories had to come from somewhere. So I think there's some beast out there, probably not around today, but something that was out there in Job's time where the Lord could say, look at that, right? Look at that big scary thing that shoots fire and is scaly and has teeth and is all kind of weird and crazy. Right? And again, it's him saying, I'm more powerful than that. I made that, right? But dragons, are they real? Kind of sounds like there's something out there that gives a little bit of credence to our modern idea and myths of dragons. All right, so I got a couple other questions that we're going to go through. And these were questions from different parts of Scripture. If you have any more kind of mythological beasts or ideas that you want to throw at me, make sure you send those as well. But these questions come from Ray. Thanks, Ray, for sending these in. So he had a question that came from Matthew 24:31. And this is Jesus talking about the end times. And specifically, he's talking here about kind of at the end of the end times, gathering up his people, the elect, to him. And verse 31 says, and he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now, depending on which translation you're reading, the language here could sound a little interesting, right? It talks about the four winds, okay, and then it talks about going into the heavens or from one heaven to another, or the end of one heaven to the other end of heaven. So the question is what is it talking about when it means the four winds, okay, and then what's it mean if he's going out into the heavens, right? Does this mean that there's possibly elect somewhere else that we don't know about? Is it, again, aliens? Is it off this world, right? So what's going on here? So we get maybe a good explanation of some of this language from Old Testament language. A lot of this is spoken by the Old Testament prophets. And so when you hear about the four winds, which again is spoken in the Old Testament, it was a way of saying every direction, right? North, south, east, west, every direction, God has it covered. He has angels and spirits and workings in every corner, as it were, of the earth. So as it talks about he's going to gather them from the four winds, he's basically saying everywhere you can think of, every direction you could go, I'm going to go there and gather those that belong to me. And it talks about from one end of heaven to the other. The word heaven here in its usage is not heaven necessarily in the celestial, supernatural sense beyond this planet, but heaven is in the sense of the sky and everything underneath it, right? So he is going to go to every place that is known, every place that's under the sky, and they're going to gather together the elect. So when he says this, it's basically a way of saying no one who belongs to God will be missed out, left out, or left behind. They'll be gathered together. And you think about this too in context of his audience. He's talking to a predominantly Jewish audience who believed the Messiah was coming for the Jews, right? So he wouldn't have to go all over the place. He just has to go to the Jews, right? But Jesus says, no, I'm going to go all over the world, all over the earth, because all over the earth will be people who belong to me, right? Every direction, the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So we talk about this. It's not, I don't think, any great secret or mystery that he's hiding here. He's simply saying, I will not miss a single person on the face of the planet that belongs to me. Another question. This question comes up quite often, right? And so this question talks about, in the beginning, you know, Adam and Eve, especially with Cain, right? And Cain gets cast out, and it says Cain went and he gets married, right? And he has children. And you think about the other sons that are mentioned, right? Abel and Seth and them as well. Who do they marry, right? So in the beginning, what's going on with marriage? Looks like my picture got a little cut off there. We can see that there, right? But what's going on with marriage in the beginning? Here's what's going to happen in the beginning, right? Here's our best understanding according to Scripture. In the beginning, Cain married his sister, or possibly a niece, but it's going to be a close relative, right? So in the beginning, marriage would have taken place amongst close relatives, brother, sister, niece, nephew, that kind of stuff. And I know it sounds kind of creepy and icky today, and I really don't suggest it. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's illegal, and it should be. Don't marry your sister or your niece or nephew or even your first cousin, okay? But you think about all the way in the beginning with Adam and Eve, what was different with Adam and Eve, especially from today, right? I mean, there's a lot of things, but come in terms of marriage and procreation, there's a word, genetics, right? Their DNA would have been pure, right? No mutations, all this different stuff I know you probably don't really want to know about, and all these different fragments and things we could talk about with breaking down the genome and blah, blah, blah. It is to say that you could, in this time, with pure genetic material, have a brother and sister marry and produce offspring without any genetic repercussion. And so it's entirely possible, and probably really the only good explanation we have, is that they would have married inside the family to produce more people. One thing it does talk about with Cain specifically, because some people say, well, it talks about the Bible, it says that Cain went out and got a wife after he had been kind of expelled, and they dwelled in the land of Nod, and he built a city and all that kind of stuff. Well, you got to read Scripture carefully on that one, because it actually says that when he was kicked out, that Cain knew his wife, and they had a child in the land of Nod, and then built that city. So it's saying that he already had a wife, and he took that wife with him. And so again, I would say that wife was another offspring of Adam and Eve. You see the verse there on the screen, right? And you think about the number of people that would be involved and be on the early earth. It says, after he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters. So imagine how many kids you could have in 800 years. It would be quite a few, and of course they're having kids and all that and good stuff. And really the commandment was given when Adam and Eve were created to fill the earth, right? To multiply. So to have that offspring, and for them to go out and be themselves, fruitful in their endeavors, right? So in the beginning, marriage, and they married within, their own family. We don't do that today. In fact, by Moses' time, God said, don't do that. That's not good anymore because the genetic pool is too thin, right? Too shallow, right? But in the beginning, marriage would have taken place inside that first early family, right? I know, kind of a maybe creepy explanation there, right? So there's some Ask Pastor Matt. Hopefully maybe you learned something. Again, maybe you can give me some feedback, teach me something as well. If you've got questions, send them in. If you've asked a question and I've missed it, I haven't responded to it, send it to me again. I live my life one sticky note at a time, so I may have missed it. All right, so send those in. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully I'll see you again on another Ask Pastor Matt.